All right, finna go ahead and get into it. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another live stream with the boy. We're going to be reacting to some Chris Williamson and some Alex Hormozi for today. If you guys like these people and want to see more content like this, I have reacted to some previous podcasts before. This one had just came out, so today is August 26th. So this one just came out today. So if you haven't seen it, it hopefully should be some good content. They usually always make very, very good content. The topic for conversation is 24 controversial truths about success and failure. A few things I want to say before I go to get it started. Make sure to follow me on Twitch, TikTok, Rumble, and on Spotify at Life of a Champ Podcast on every single platform. I do reactions on Mondays and I listen to music as well as I have a podcast on Thursdays. Every Thursday at 7, 8 o'clock Arizona time, I usually go ahead and go live. And if you want to see some of my content, tap in this Thursday as well. Other than that, let's go ahead and get it started, man. All right. Right, I got it. All right, cool. All right, let's get it.
Here we are again. Hard things are hard. That's why they're hard. Another episode. The biggest risk to your future isn't your competition. It's the distractions you insist on keeping in your life rather than doing the things you know you should be doing but aren't. People delay doing things they don't like for longer than it takes to do them.
Facts. Let me give you my take on this real quick. Yes, that's exactly the way that it is. People go ahead and procrastinate the things that they know they need to go ahead and do. And if you just went ahead and did them, it would save you so much time. It would save you so much mental energy just if you did the things that you know you need to go ahead and do. So if you're watching this and there's something that you know that you're putting off, make sure you go ahead and do what you know you gotta do and stop putting it off. You're wasting energy, you're wasting time, and you're wasting your potential.
There have been so many times in my life where I knew I needed to do something, and then I filled all this extra time not doing that thing. And then the moment I did it, I was like, wow, that took way less time than I thought it was going to take. And not only that, it took way less time than it took me to delay to actually get to this point. And if I had only started with just doing what I was supposed to do, I could have done 4 or 5 other things that I was also supposed to do by this exact same point. And so thinking about it from that perspective, I've tried to eliminate as much time between I think I should do this thing and beginning doing it. And I think you get this positive reinforcement cycle that occurs every time you start. I call it pulling the thread. It's like, I just need to start pulling the thread. And then all of a sudden what feels really unknown becomes very tangible. And you're like, oh, I understand the 6 problems I have to solve to do this big thing. But now I know the problems, and then it feels like you can wrap your arms around it, and then you can start taking it one bite at a time.
This same thing works in reverse as well, that when you put something off, it makes putting it off more mañana, mañana, mañana.
I used to define power by the distance between thoughts and reality. Meaning, if you think about somebody who's omnipotent, so if God or the God figure would be omnipotent, as he thinks, things are. So there's zero space between thoughts and reality. And so if we want to be more godlike in our lives, the distance that we can shrink between wanting to do something or thinking something should be done and it being done is a direct indication of our personal power in our lives. And so that has helped me basically think, don't be a powerless bitch.
Facts.
Like, just shrink the gap. And I think that's why a lot of my little like personal hacks of waking up and then trying to shrink the time between when I wake up and when I start working, and shrinking the time between one task and the next task. Like, you don't need to take 30 minutes of getting ready to start working. Like, you can just start working, because as soon as you get into it, you start pulling the thread and you're like, oh, here it is. And all of the time that I was getting ready to work, I was just using up my best brain power time on things that truly don't move the needle at all.
Yeah, I came to call that the productivity rain dance.
Yeah, right.
That you sort of do this weird sacred ritual beforehand.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about this before, but it's, there are certain things that you can do that will make success or productivity or focus more likely and better.
Totally.
That doesn't mean that you should disregard them. That over-reliance on them makes a very fragile, unrobust way to get into working.
I would delineate the difference between preparation and routine. And so if I'm preparing for a presentation, for example, I might assemble my notes. I might read some stuff about the audience ahead of time. I might read about whoever's, doing the the event and learn more about that. I see that as preparation for the thing, which I still see as work. And I think some people, I made a post about how preparation is like everything. I put a lot into preparation. They're like, oh, see, you have a morning routine. I was like, no, I don't need to stand on one foot and do 17 cold plunges and write 6 affirmations, because none of those things are directly related to the work that I'm going to do. And so for me, if it's basically preparation is just a stage of the work. And so if I need to prepare to work, then that's fine as long as it's related to the work that I'm going to be doing.
Well, we spoke about this yesterday, the difference between focusing on inputs and focusing on outcomes. Right.
Yeah.
If you optimize for outcomes, the inputs are always optimized. But if you optimize for inputs, you go, what did I actually get done at the end of the day? So the person that does do the productivity rain dance and it takes ages, and everyone's done this. Everyone's got a blank piece of paper in front of them and they end up washing dishes that they never use. Or, the weirdest tasks become alluring because of that. Focusing on outcomes.
So when we brought this up, it was perfect because I had a whole thing that I was wanting to talk to you about this. So I'm a big proponent of something I call the rule of 100, and I'm not the one who invented this, but it's basically 100 primary actions. So I talk about this within the context of advertising. So you make 100 minutes of content, you do 100 outreach if you're doing outbound, you spend $100 a day on ads, and if you've already spent the money on ads, then you're doing 100 minutes a day of writing ad copy, looking at other people's ads, looking for hooks, and then trying to create more advertisements for your business. And the rule of 100 for most people takes about 4 hours a day-ish. And the thing is that's pure inputs, not output. But I've already taken the time to define what those inputs are that create the outputs. But later on in the book, $100 Million Leads, I talk about the rule of 100 on steroids, which is something that I learned from a guy who owned 13 or 14 really successful gyms, and he called it open to goal. And he said, yeah. He said, my managers work open to goal. And I was like, what does that mean? It's like, so they work open until they hit their goal. And so sometimes that means they hit their goal by noon and they can cut out, or that means that they have to go from 5 a.m. until midnight that night, because that's how long it took them to hit the goal. And so I've seen this across a lot of high achievers across domains. So like, I'll keep shooting free shots until I hit 100 free shots. I will run until this happens. I will practice my presentation until I do 0 mess ups, right? Or whatever that output is that you want for quality or quantity. And I think that you have to first figure out what the input is that most closely correlates or tracks with the output you want. And then you jam as much as you possibly can into inputs. Because if I said, hey, go get me 10 customers, yeah, exactly, you freeze, because it's like, well, what do I do? And so then normally people they skew, like behavior skew. So it's all over the place. It's scattered. It's shotguns, sprays. And then they eventually figure out one thing that works. And then it's like, once you hit that, then you just jam that button as hard as you possibly can. And I think that I've been disproportionately successful in different domains in my life by ruthlessly focusing on one input. I mean, even when I was a kid, when I played video games, it's like if you find a spawn point for zombies right before the end of the level, I would just sit there for like 8 hours and just wait for the troll to come up and just slice him again and get my little diamonds and put it in. And I would just do that for hours because I was like, oh, I got to level up my avatar. But I think I play the game of business the exact same way.
Andy Groves says there are so many people working so hard and achieving so little.
Facts.
And that's the lack of correlation between inputs and outcomes.
Yeah. I think the vast majority of business owners, I come from the business perspective, but the vast majority of business owners work a fair amount. They just work on the wrong stuff and they do it the wrong way. And so they get so little for their effort that they wonder when they're at home empty-handed in bed, why isn't this working when I am working? But if you define work, at least the way I do, which is output. So I define work by output. And in order to get output, it's volume times leverage. So how many times you do the thing times how much you get for each time you do it. And so that is do you work smart or do you work hard? It's you do both. You do as many reps as you possibly can, and you do it with the most leverage possible. So if I make 100 phone calls, the leverage that I can have there would be how skilled I am. So if I make 100 calls, I might get 10 times more. And so I worked more. I had more output than somebody who has less skill. But the only way you get skilled is by doing more inputs, by working more. And so it's this virtuous cycle of doing more and getting better, and then you get more for what you do.
Yeah. Magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding all the time. Every single time that there is when
One thing I want to mention with what Alex Hormozi was talking about, and this is kind of something that I feel like a lot of people can apply to a lot of different areas in their life. First thing is this, right? You should find out what is the minimum amount of work you need to do in order to get the maximum amount of result that you can get. So let's just say that there was a certain workout that you can do, or certain let's just say for example, you've been spending 2.5 hours in the gym. Let's just say hypothetically speaking, you had 2.5 hours to spend, and you've been spending 2.5 hours, and you've been getting a good workout. Now, what I would recommend is what is the minimum amount of time that you can spend in the gym with getting the maximum amount of output. So therefore, let's just say you got it down to like let's just say 45 minutes or an hour, and you're by yourself, putting in that work where you can still put in the amount of output. You can maximize the amount of output by minimizing the amount of time it takes in order to go ahead and achieve that output, if that makes any sense. So the better you are and the more clarified you are with what the essentially being effective and being efficient in what you're trying to do, the better off you're going to be, because now you're going to save time. Now you're going to save many different resources that you do have. Maybe you're going to save some focus, and maybe you can save a lot of different things based off of you making that one decision, or like I said, better yet, even clarifying specifically what is going to allow you to maximize the amount of result with also minimizing the amount of time or energy that you can put into it. So keep it in mind.
making progress in this way, what is the highest pain task that's in front of me that I've put off the most? It's always that one. It always is. You know, after you spend enough time thinking about work and deconstructing the way that you piece your day and your life together, you sometimes believe that the answer is still out there. And what you actually realize is that you've already learned it. And it's like, it's that quote or that insight or that book. It's one of the first books you read, because all of the big insights from productivity and personal development are the lowest hanging fruit. They're the ones that are repeated across the most books because they're the most reliable, scalable, and robust. It's like, I don't need to be looking out there for most of the new insights. They're just shit that I already learned.
Yeah, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught.
That's an interesting take right there.
Bad things don't come in threes. Bad things happen. People don't know how to cope, and they allow one bad thing to snowball into more. Bad stuff sucks. The only thing worse is letting one bad thing ruin many good things.
I'm glad you found that one. That was one on that list of things that, quotes I wish had gone more viral. The amount of, I think it happens more when you're younger, but, girlfriend breaks up with you. Okay, then you go into work and you sulk because you're distracted, and then you don't do the same level of effort and you're not enthusiastic. And then all of a sudden your work suffers and you get put on a PIP or you get fired. And then now you're fired and you don't have a girlfriend, and then you start gaining weight and you stop going to the gym. And all of a sudden you're like, man, bad things happen in threes. It's like, no, bad things happen all the time, and they only become interrelated if you let it affect your behavior. And so I think the equal opposite of that is thinking, okay, this bad thing occurred. What can I do to decrease the likelihood something else bad occurs in the meantime? And then boiling everything down to activities or the actions that I have to take. And I think about that actually a lot, which is how, like, if you think about from the power perspective of, okay, something bad happens, how much would it affect my behavior? Well, the person who's indestructible would have something terrible happen and then nothing would change. And I love that.
Or they'd get better.
Exactly, yeah.
That's anti-fragility, right?
Yeah, the sword of Gryffindor. It only drinks in that which makes it stronger.
Yeah, and part of that's just maintaining your systems and knowing exactly what you need to go ahead and do. The problem is a lot of people don't know how to even acquire systems, and they don't know what to do. So even the people that do know what to do, a lot of those people don't maintain the systems that get them to where they need to go ahead and go. So let's just say something happens that is bad, right? The reason why a lot of people struggle with that same type of result where other aspects of life start to begin to suffer is simply because they don't have a strong foundation in the systems that allow them to get the result that they need to get. So my advice personally on this topic would be maintain and clarify the systems that you need to go ahead and maintain and clarify. And you should be much better off when going into those and approaching those certain situations. Just because of the simple fact that you'll have more of an insight that a lot of people would not have if you were to take that approach?
Harry Potter reference. Weren't expecting that. Yeah, the people don't know how to cope thing, especially with bad stuff, is it does explain why you end up with this weird spiral. Tiny little avalanche pebble at the top, and then this huge sort of over-exaggerated reaction downstream.
Yeah, people don't know how to manage their emotions. I think the more, at least for me, the more I've tried to create space between how I feel and what I do, the more consistent my outcomes have been.
Fair enough.
What do you mean?
So if I need to create content and I'm not feeling it, or I'm feeling tired, or things like that, the more times I give into that excuse or that feeling, then the more superstitious I become about doing it in the future. Whereas a lot of times, if I can just start when I am tired or when something is painful and then still execute about the same as before, I look at game tape or I look at video or I look at the content from those sessions, for example, and I see that I remember feeling terrible during the session, but you can't really see anything. And I think the more times you get that loop going, the more you can separate how you feel and what is required. And the more times you do what is required to get what you want, the more times you get what you want.
I spoke to Huberman last year. I think it's called the anterior mid-singular cortex. It's an area of the brain. If I've got that right, fucking yes, bro. The best advert for Newtonic ever. Basically, there is an area of the brain that tracks when you do something that you don't want to do. And you strengthen the connections in it by doing things that you don't want to do, especially when you really don't want to do them. So you're hypertrophying. It's this exact sort of intuition that you've got that some people will call it resilience or willpower or whatever. But this is neurologically represented in the brain. These connections get stronger. So I think it's
brain
so funny.
Increases in size, I'm pretty sure.
Gym bros will need a gym analogy in order to be able to believe that their brain changes. But it's really useful to think, hey, you're hypertrophying this area of your brain. Yeah. I snapped an Achilles. I had to do a very particular series of rehab movements in order to grow it back. This is just the same.
Yeah. Agreed.
Successful people, this is kind of similar to what you were talking about. Bad things don't come in threes. Successful people see opportunity in every failure. Normal people see failure in every opportunity. Both are right. Only one gets rich.
Damn.
Yeah, so this has been something I've been thinking about a lot, which is basically the shittiness of stuff, which is when you're growing in a business, it's very painful. When you're stagnating in a business and you're plateaued and you don't know what to do, it's very painful. When you're declining and you also don't know what to do, it's very painful. And so that means that all conditions of reality are painful. And so if pain is a prerequisite for reality, then it means it's just a signal that we are alive.
Facts.
And so in thinking about that, rather than pain as a problem, it is a signal that I'm breathing, and then becomes irrelevant.
How do you ensure that you're not suffering unnecessarily? You know, pain can be a useful signal. It can tell you to move away from certain things that are suboptimal.
Yeah. I probably have relatively contrarian views on this. But just even the judgment on pain, I relatively reject. Just like pain is good, pain is bad. I mean, in the gym, to give a gym example, they found that the pain that you experience when you're going to work out, and there's a difference between like massive joint, you're like, oh, I just snapped a muscle, and like just feeling bad. But feeling bad has zero correlation to your performance in the gym. And so I remember reading that for the Olympic, weight teams, they talked about that. And I was like, oh, well, if it has no correlation, then it's almost irrelevant and I can just keep living my life. And so I think the ultimate version of the resilience that you were referencing earlier is, rather than, in the beginning, you're like, I feel bad. And then you think that should weigh on the decision of whether you do the thing that you're supposed to do. And then you start realizing that you can do the thing even though you don't feel good about it. And you start hypertrophying it. But I think the ultimate version of the hypertrophy, when the muscle becomes a tendon or it just becomes fused, is when you don't even consider how you feel. It's just not a thought. You just do it.
That's that movement from sort of type 2 to type 1 thinking, from it being very conscious, very effortful to it's just a reaction. I get up and I start to write.
Right.
And
And you don't use up any willpower.
no, because it's just what you do.
Right.
There's a Rory Sutherland that we were talking about yesterday. He's the only guy that I've ever heard swear in a TED talk. And he gave me this idea, which is kind of related. Things are not what they are. Things are what we think they are. For instance, you're doing a hard workout, which gives you a signature feeling. You're laid on the floor, panting, heart rate at 180, sweating from everywhere with the taste of metal in your mouth. This is oddly enjoyable. But if this exact same sensation was to spontaneously occur in your car while sat in traffic, you'd call an ambulance for fear that you're having a heart attack.
Facts.
Framing is everything. Rory Sutherland says, sometimes you just want to stand in the corner and stare out of the window. The problem is, when you're not smoking and staring out of the window, you're an antisocial, friendless idiot. If you stand and stare out of the window with a cigarette, you're a fucking philosopher. The power of reframing things cannot be overstated. It's significantly easier to find a way to reframe your experiences as enjoyable while you improve them, rather than waiting for them to be done before you give yourself license to be happy.
So a friend of mine, she's a very, very successful therapist. And she always asks her patients when they come to her and say some terrible thing happened. She said, what would it take for this to be amazing? And so, for example, lady comes, says, we're getting a divorce. And she says, so what would it take for this to be amazing? And so it just completely shifts the reality of like, okay, how could this be an amazing thing that could happen to me? And this is relevant for me, shifting gears, because we just had a big tryout inside of our company for a presentation slot that we have an event. So we had a bunch of the leaders in the company.
It was like the fucking Hunger Games.
Yeah, we put a cash prize
Fight
out.
to the death, pitchforks.
We did. No, we put a big cash prize out there. Oh yeah, I totally did that. I told her, I was like, I'll have no expression.
Just in a toga.
Yeah, exactly. And I could tell that some of them were nervous. And I thought about this because, I speak a fair amount and I don't get a lot of nerves in general. And I have a whole bunch of thoughts on that. But the most basic one is that if you're still feeling anxiety, which many of them were like, hey, I'm so nervous, or hey, I have a lot of anxiety before going up. I thought about it, and champions just interpret anxiety as excitement. And if you're excited to go up, then you're like, I'm amped, versus I'm stressed. But it feels the same. But the way you frame it totally changes how you feel when you're stepping on stage.
Facts.
But my 2 cents of, if you are feeling lots of anxiety, it means you need to practice more. That's just my 2 cents. And that comes for everything, whether it's to have a meeting or give a presentation or write an email or do a book. Like if you feel nervous before you release it, then you probably didn't work on it enough. And I think the reality is that most people, to get not anxious about whatever they're doing, you have to do it so many times that by the last time you're doing it, you're bored of it. Like you don't even want to see the thing again. When you're sick of it is the point where you'll have no adrenal response to the stimulus because you've seen it so many times. You could do it in your sleep because you hate it at this point. And then when you get up, you're like, oh my God, let's just do this because I can breathe this thing
over with.
Yeah.
What's the gap between your expectation of what is going to happen and the requirement that you need to perform, right? This is where I need to be, and this is how I think I'm going to perform, as opposed to the other way. So I saw this firsthand when I did the live tour last year. So I did, I think, 17 shows in 28 days, 3 continents, right? Like proper tour, like real proper tour thing. And, I did 4 work in progress shows and then that run all around UK, Ireland, Dubai, Canada, US, Canada again, US again. And I could see, because it was around about every other day for a month. And each time that I stepped out on stage, every single time that even though I'd done the prep, I'd spent all of this time, I'd done the thing, I'd tried to, I'm not nervous, I'm excited, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Still, that degraded over time until at the end of it. And this is why comedians, I think, when they end up doing really big tours, one of my friends did a 300-date tour of the same show. He said, I no longer felt like a comedian, I was a performer. Oh, yeah. Because he's not stepping out on stage. He is so dialed and routinized that he's bored while he does it. And that's how you look at, oh my God, Joe Rogan just did Netflix live to fucking God knows how many millions of people. Metropolitan area of San Antonio's internet probably went down for him to be able to get that connection moving. And How could he do that? Well, all of these people watching and all the rest of it. That set that Joe did, I've seen at the Vulcan Gas Company downtown in Austin, and I've seen it at the Mothership in different iterations for coming up on 3 years now. And his last special was 6 years ago. That guy has said those sentences and waited those times and got those laughs and understood the inflections and the little pauses he needs to do maybe 300 times on that one set. There's no more degrees of free. The only thing that could go wrong is a real quirk mistake that's kind of, to be honest, out of your control. If you misspeak a word when you're paying attention, that's not your fault. So yeah, that's how people have unbelievable performance ability. It's just a case of stepping there, sort of 1 degree of competence at a time.
That's definitely a good point he brings up, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the way that I personally felt like performing within class. This is part of the reason why I decided to do a podcast and do a live stream. You just need to become comfortable with what you're talking about. You need to be very, very knowledgeable, and you need to be able to have thought it out previously and have spent enough time thinking about what you're going to say before you go ahead and say it. The thing is, the reason why people still feel anxiety in those certain situations is because, quite frankly, they have not spent enough time thinking about it, or they haven't spent enough time being in the feeling or putting themselves in the situation that would allow them to become comfortable with that situation. And obviously, this is my example that I had used for my own personal life is definitely one that it is that in a micro scale. It pretty much is that. But at the same time, it's like the only way that you're going to get better at something is if you constantly go ahead and do it and get to the point where you feel comfortable. You feel ultra comfortable in this type of setting because you've already done it so many times, or you've already thought about the idea so many times. So when you get up to go ahead and do something that can bring you anxiety, whatever it is, talk to women, do a podcast, have a conversation, if you spent enough time, truly spent enough time thinking about all the ways in which it can go, and speak and get comfortable and get familiar with your material that you would even talk about, it's going to be a lot easier than what you could ever anticipate, as long as you've actually spent the time necessary in order for it to be a normal thing. Obviously, his example, Chris Williamson's example, when he talked about Joe Rogan doing the same set 300 times and getting to the point where it's boring at that point. That is when you know you're familiar, ultra familiar with what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. What is your opinion on this specific thing? And you just need to become clear with that. And you need to learn about yourself when it comes to that. What do you actually believe? What do you actually think? What are you actually comfortable with saying? The second you can become clear on all these things, and the second that you can truly familiarize with what you truly believe in, it's just going to make everything so much easier. Conversations are going to be easier. Going up and presenting yourself is going to be easier. There's just going to be so many things that are a lot easier.
And if we think of confidence as the percentage likelihood of what we think is going to happen will happen as a predictive metric, then in order to be more confident, we want to have more proof that what we think will happen will happen. And so the easiest way to do that is to do it a lot of times. And so it would be reasonable to say that you're confident that it will go the way you want because it has gone the way you've wanted so many times in a row before.
I've just realized I've never thought of this before. The fact that the word confidence as in how we describe it from a psychological perspective and confidence as in the interval level that you have numerically are the same fucking word. That's so funny.
Operationalizing. What? How do you become confident? Do it enough times that you feel like it is unlikely that what you think should happen won't happen.
My model of the world is accurate.
I'm confident when I go up to girls. Well, you start going to girls and you start tanking, and then 1 out of 10 times it goes well, and then you do it another 10 times, and 2 out of 10 times goes well, and then 4 out of 10 times, and then 8 out of 10 times, and all of a sudden you're confident because you have a high degree of predictive power when you say it will go this way.
That's such a good reframing of confidence, and the best part is you get to use the same word.
And you can boil it down to inputs. You just have to do more.
I've been using my 8-sleep mattress.
Sorry, Chris Williamson, I'm not getting paid for this shit, baby. I ain't getting paid for this. We want to skip ahead. Yes, sir, man. Yes, sir. All right, I'm going to go back. If you guys have any comments, make sure to leave it in the comments. I'll read it out right now in a second. KJ, appreciate you for stopping by. Yeah, speech is definitely a huge one with getting rid of anxiety. You just got to speak more. You just got to know what you want to talk about. You just got to know and familiarize with what you truly believe in and what you truly think, and then it's gonna become a lot easier, right? I've done a podcast for almost 3 years now, and the reason why I can speak with as much conviction and confidence is simply because I've thought about it enough. I've talked about it enough. I've had enough conversations outside of the podcast that would help me develop my own ideas and to truly figure out whether I truly believe in what I say I believe. More importantly, but yeah, let's get into it, man.
Wisdom and modern wisdom. A checkout. This is my favorite one, I think, from you over the last few months. You once wanted the life you have. And if you don't like the life you have, you probably won't like the one you want, but don't have either.
Yeah, this one I think about all the time because I think about the life that I have now, and I know that I wanted this life, but I obviously do a lot of thinking about this type of stuff. But the equal opposite of that is that when I was poor, I was pretty happy. I was okay with being poor. And now that I am rich, I'll put quotes on that, degrees, it's about the same. And so then it just goes down to, well, then the richness had nothing to do with the level of contentedness, which means that my wants in past and present and future all go into the bucket of irrelevant in terms of their ability to affect my perception of reality in the present. And so in thinking about that, it makes my wants have less stake today. And so a lot of anxiety that I think a lot of people have is around things that haven't happened yet, either good or bad. Like, I hope this speech goes well, or I hope I get this job promotion. But the reality is that once you get the job promotion, you wanted it, you resettle. And the negative version of this is, and you've probably seen this stuff, but when handicapped people get handicapped, so they have a terrible accident, they get paralyzed or they lose a leg or whatever, there's a dip in their subjective well-being. But after 3 to 6 months, it typically restabilizes, which means that if I didn't get paralyzed, or even if I did get paralyzed, I'd be just about as content as I am right now. It's like whatever is about to happen is probably not as bad as that. And so that's the worst case scenario, which is nothing. So, okay.
Good things aren't as good as you think they are. Bad things aren't as bad as you think they are.
Yeah, life is life.
Well, it's the
Damn.
you've already achieved goals that you said would make you happy. Again, it's the other side of this. And, you know, the fact that we take for granted things that only in recent memory we would have begged to have had the opportunity to have been able to have. And now we're flippant about them. The new car that you thought about and you researched for 18 months and then you finally got it and you just curbed the tires yesterday and you go, all right, whatever. And you're like, you spent all of this time thinking about it. The house that you're going to move into, the marriage that you were going to do, the holiday you were going to take. I told you about this last time. Morgan Housel steps out after this huge big buildup with his kids and his wife, steps out onto the balcony of this holiday that he'd taken. And his first thought was, wow, it would be so good if we could come back here next year. That was like during the process of experiencing the thing, he was thinking about the next thing. And he caught himself and thought, okay, this means that success isn't a goal, a journey, or a destination. When you get it wrong, it's a horizon. Every single step that you take towards it, it runs one step further away.
That's interesting.
So during my year off that I took during the year of the sale, when I couldn't really work on the business because you don't want to change anything major when you're going through a sale. But I didn't know if I was going to be owning this business soon. So I basically just had to do nothing because I also had to demonstrate that the team could do it without me. So that's still a sellable asset. So I basically just sat there for a year. And that's when a lot of my thoughts kind of caught up from, when I had started years earlier. And that was when I kind of refined my kind of theory of living for me, which is that hard work is the goal. And so it's not like work hard so that X, because as soon as you have a so that, then the X is the thing. But if the goal is to work as hard as you possibly can, then the only real output we have is who we become along the way. And so in reframing that, then it's something that I can win or measure myself against every day in real time throughout the day, which is how hard am I working? Because that is the goal. And then even I say this just for audio, but everything else takes care of itself, still puts the everything else as the goal still. It's just being vaguer. But if you just say the only point is working hard, because I know that whatever I'm going to get is stuff that I will become accustomed to. And the, I guess, opposite of the hedonic treadmill is like the resilience piece, is that my ability to work hard itself is growable. And so I just need to keep my RP, my rate of perceived exertion, at 8 or 9 or 10, because I know that when I look back on my life, the days that I loved the most were days when I had nothing left in the tank. And there's this thing that Jesse Itzler has this, and I love it. I hate him for having it because it's so fucking good. But he taught it to his kids, which is they have a little zero, means that there's nothing left in the tank. And when they finish a race or they do whatever, it's like, did you leave anything in the tank? And I thought about that, and the best days of my life were ones when I had nothing left in the tank. And so then the goal becomes to empty the tank, not where I drive, but just to drive the car as hard as I possibly can. And that means that in the beginning, it's just straightaways and just seeing how high I can rev the engine. But as I become more advanced, it's like, all right, well, now we've got turns, and then it's turns in elevation, and then it's turns in elevation without guardrails because we have risk. And so when I think about how hard I want to work, the interesting thing about that is that the only person who can judge you on your success is you, because you're the only one who knows how much left in the tank you really had. And the better you get, and you can resonate with this, you start winning exteriorly. And that's when people are like, it felt so empty. It's because they didn't actually work as hard as they could have. They just worked hard enough to beat everyone else. But that discrepancy between how hard you could have worked to work your hardest versus what was required in order to win, to me, that's the opportunity that shifting towards the work being the goal unlocks for you. And I work harder now than I did when I was poor. And I think it's because I've learned to enjoy it.
How do you ensure that the hard work focus doesn't detach you from outcomes and inputs? This seems like there's a little bit of a tension with what we started talking about in the beginning. So
totally.
It's direction over speed is the first one, but we're now talking about maximizing for speed.
Yeah.
So how do we balance direction and speed?
So with the question, if the outcome that we're trying to have is being present, then the outcome actually is irrelevant, because it's about how much you empty the tank. If we're talking about the science of achievement, then the outcome does matter, obviously. And so balancing both of those things, which is that if I want to accomplish all my goals, then I need to make sure that my inputs are tied as closely as humanly possible to the outcome. If I want to be satisfied, it doesn't matter at all. And so I think it's marrying those two ideas, where the perfect world, in my opinion, would be you work as hard as you possibly can because you thought ahead of time, what is the input that has the closest correlation with the outcome that I want? And then you put your blinders on and you start digging.
So yeah, he has a very, very good point that I think is fairly interesting. He says he basically, at least through my own analysis, he's talking about when you're trying to go ahead and achieve something, as long as you're doing all that you can do, you should be able to live with the results. So if let's just say you have a goal, and it's not that you can't have a goal, it's that you shouldn't be goal focused. You should be focused on putting in some work and doing and hopefully systemizing your life where the things that you do on a daily basis are going to eventually lead you to your goal. So you have the correct system in place. So therefore, you just focus on the daily. You do, and you, like he had mentioned, you emptied the tank. And your ability to empty the tank on a daily basis by having the correct systems in place are going to allow you to eventually get to the goals that you want to go ahead and pursue. But it's only if you empty the tank, and it's only if you're systemizing your life in a way that would be favorable to a potential outcome that will eventually come if you're consistent. So now it becomes consistency with emptying your tank and knowing exactly what to empty the tank on. So it's a different mind frame, right? So you're no longer focused on trying to achieve a goal. You're focused on the character development. You're focused on developing yourself, developing your discipline, developing your consistency over a long enough period of time, where eventually in that period of time you're going to eventually achieve your goal, because you were being the person that was deserving of whatever goal that you had intended on. Does that make any sense? So you need to make sure that you're being the person that you know you need to be. You're developing the character, and you're doing the things that would eventually get you to where you want to go.
We don't rise to the standards we have when others are watching. We fall to the standards we have when no one is watching. the only work that really matters is the work that no one sees. It shows you who you really are rather than who you say you are.
Mm.
There's this line that I heard David Goggins say on Rogan, and I can't remember who he was saying it to or what he said in response to, but he just said, "I'm David Goggins, bitch."
Talk that shit.
And I remember him saying it, and I thought to myself, like, you want to be able to say that in the mirror to yourself and not laugh at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I can do that is know that when no one's watching, I work harder than when they're watching. And thinking about it like that has given me this persistent and ever-present scorecard or third party that's like, no one's watching, which means now you have to work because otherwise you're full of shit.
Mm.
And so it's this continuous reinforcing cycle of the me and other me holding the whip behind me to see how much I can take. But with each lash of the whip that I take, learning that I can take it and continue to trudge on. And so as long as you keep going, you bear witness to yourself of what you are capable of. And I find that incredibly satisfying in the trenches of misery when you have to go through it.
It means that you're not full of shit.
I'm still here.
It means that you're not full of shit. What it comes down to is, I think I told you this story about when I was with Sam last year in LA. So Sam Ovens used to make content on the internet. Now he's very much an operator rather than a front-facing, which is funny to think about Sam the creator as opposed to Sam the operator. And I asked why he'd stopped making content. And he said, because I felt like I had to start living up to in private the things which I was saying in public. And he was beginning to feel discordance between the two. You know, he was making changes personally, but he'd created a brand publicly. But I think if you can get to the stage where the public version of you is the best version of you, and then private you has to live up to the best version of you, and then you get to do this sort of self-reinforcing cycle, that's kind of the virtuous version of that, which I guess is kind of similar to what you're talking about here.
I think that's very, very interesting. I had recently did a podcast where I was talking about the importance of social obligation. So when you go ahead and say you're going to do something, you want to, well, let's just say you have a goal and you want to go ahead and tell everybody about it. So now everybody's going to hold you to that goal or to that identity that you said that you were going to uphold. I think it's very, very important because, like they had mentioned, now you have to live in private who you say you are in public and who people perceive you, who perceive you to be in public, right? So that's going to hold you to your word. That's going to hold you to your reputation. And if you decide to slack off, if you decide to not be the person that you said that you were, you're going to feel guilty, and that's going to hopefully change your behavior, because if it doesn't, then you're going to live with guilt. And people will be able to feel that. People will be able to sense that within your character, or they'll be able to begin to notice the subtleties that will be and that would inevitably show if you're not being exactly who you say you are. So it is very, very important to have that social obligation so you can not only say who you are, but also mean what you say, if that makes any sense. So I think that's very, very key. And if you are able to implement that in many different aspects of your life, so you can be the person that you say that you are, and you're also putting in the work in order to reinforce that same saying. I think it's super, super important. That's something that I've tried to implement, and I'm trying my best to implement today, and it has worked out fantastically for me. So try that out for yourself. But yeah, like I said, use that social obligation, because sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's very, very easy for you to fail yourself. But here's the thing: to fail in front of others, that's an entirely different type of failure. And some people are just really, really content and okay with failing. But here's the thing: if everybody knows that you're a failure, you're probably gonna want to try harder than what you've been trying. That's all I have to say.
I think what we're teasing at is authenticity. And so a lot of people feel like imposters because what they think, what they say, and what they do are completely different. But from an operational perspective, because that's how I like to define a lot of words, which is, what do I have to do to be that, right? What do I have to do to be authentic? And you can describe someone as authentic by saying, how would you behave if there was no possibility of punishment? And so if you could not be punished at all, that behavior is who you are authentically. And so, in my opinion, our degrees of freedom are predicated on how much, to what extent we act as though we could not be punished. And so if what we want to do and what we do have no possibility of punishment, that is what we are when we are our true selves.
Jimmy Carr talks about nobody throws a Coke can out of the window with kids in the back.
Right.
That means you're a fucking monster.
Yeah.
It's what you do when there's no one around. Your old one about authenticity. People are attracted to authenticity, but it's hard to define for me. Here's my best attempt. True alignment of what you think, what you say, and what you do. The hardest part is realizing that our thoughts are fucked and that we have to fix them instead of faking the next two.
And it's exactly that. And I actually think ground zero of that is living out your fucked thoughts and then slowly trying. Like, I think I think the hardest jump is actually doing and saying what you think. When someone's like, hey, what do you think about this? And you're like, I wasn't paying attention at all. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. And so then you basically become, because I think if personal truth of not lying to, if you start by not lying to yourself, and then you start saying those things, then you start not lying to other people. And I think if you can decrease the friction between what you really think and what you say, it starts to create some virtuous cycle outside of you that starts to orient your behavior so that you actually start doing what you really think. And I have integrity, but in the truest sense as one of my personal kind of goals. But it's jarring to people when you're just honest and like really honest. Like, hey, do you want to go to this, to Sarah's birthday party? No. And they're like, what do you mean? You busy? They're like, no, I'm not busy, but I don't want to go. People have a hard time just saying no to things. And I would encourage you, if you're listening to this, like, try saying no to, try actually telling the truth when you don't want to do something. Because we have so many social niceties that we say, oh, I'm really busy, or it's a really bad time right now, or whatever. I had somebody the other day, I was with a friend and I didn't notice that I did this. So sometimes it's nice to have somebody from the outside. And so somebody came up to me, we were looking at a real estate property and someone knew I was going to be there. And so that guy showed up unannounced or whatever. And he was like, hey man, can we do a podcast? And I was like, I'm just in town, going to hang out with Layla for the next few days. Like, not really trying to do that. And he asked again and he was like, hey, maybe like 20 minutes. Let's we can just rock one out. And I was like, well, let me show you my calendar. And I pulled up my calendar and it was all empty. And I said, see, there's nothing on there. And I was like, and I just want to keep it that way. And I didn't think anything of it, but apparently he left. And then my friend just starts crying, laughing, just thinking how hilarious. He's like, I can't believe you said that. That was so boss, blah, blah. And I was like, what is he talking about? He's like, you just showed him your calendar that you had nothing and you were still like, you're still not going to get any of my time. And I didn't perceive any of this extra narrative that he added to it. But I think just being able to say no to stuff when people ask you for it, because people ask you for stuff all the time. It's these little nibs, these little tiny things. Hey, can you do this? Or, hey, can we show up to this thing? Or, hey, you're supposed to, or, hey, your aunt did that one thing for you, so therefore you owe her. And saying like, I don't subject myself to those rules. And I had a New Year's resolution, which I do believe in making resolutions. Like, why not? If you stick with them. And so
Facts.
one of my more recent ones was, there are no such thing as social obligations, only consequences. So you have no social obligations. You have social consequences, but you don't have social obligations. And so you have to go. I don't have to go. If I don't go, what will happen as a result? It decreases the likelihood they will invite me again, which is great because then I won't have to say no again. So this actually saves me time in the future. And so a lot of people don't play out the like, what happens if? It's like, oh, more of the thing that I would prefer, which is not getting invited to these stupid weddings or not getting invited to these, Christs or whatever they're called, whatever the thing is. You probably know what the word I'm trying to say.
I do what you're talking.
Yeah. Well, kids getting circumcised or
What?
Well, you go and watch it? Like a viewing
That's
gallery?
a common thing. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
American, man.
Circumcisions. I think it's
American.
a bris. Whatever. Doesn't matter.
All right.
What the fuck are they talking about?
If you say no and are honest about why you said no, people will be jarred. But then you get this muscle, when we're talking about that muscle of being authentic, which is just saying what you really think. And I think that when you do that, you unlock a certain level of confidence in yourself where you're like, oh, I didn't die. Oh, actually what I would prefer to have happened as a result of that. Oh, you know what? It's Friday night and I am going to get a good night's sleep because I do have a clear day tomorrow and I'm going to work my face off and I didn't have to go to Sarah's thing. And to me, that's like over time, I think I just do more and more and more of that and it feels better and better and better.
It's funny that your friend saw that as a flex. That it was, and I can see why, and I think I would too. Oh my God, dude, like you totally owned him with that thing, like you showed off the fact that you've got nothing. But really, if we're all being honest, if we didn't want to do it, that is the truth.
Right.
The only reason that it feels like a flex is that it's such a left turn from the social mores that people typically go through. I said this to you yesterday. Dan Bilzerian's superpower is his frictionlessness from what he wants to his mouth. Say what you want about Dan, but he's lived very unapologetically. And that's, what are the things that you can get downstream from that? I mean, maybe you don't like his values or his principles. Maybe you think that he's a bad guy, or maybe you think he's worth more or less money than he actually is. All of these things. But what you can't say is that you don't trust the things that he does are not the things that he wants to do. And that commands a level of respect. That absolutely, and it should command a level of respect.
I actually think that when you live that way, people trust you more because their ability to predict your behavior.
100%. If I can't trust your no, how can I trust your yes?
Right.
Damn.
And I think when people see you say no and then later say yes, your yes means a lot more.
Of course. Because it's the same thing Peterson talks about, that a rabbit can't be good. It just has no choice to be otherwise. That you can't, the vicious, I think that some rabbits are a bit like they're twats. So you probably can find some that are nasty. You might have heard me say that I took my testosterone.
All right, brother. Here's the thing. I ain't getting paid for this, so we're going to go ahead and skip it along, man. So this is a live reaction. So if you guys have any comments, please leave it in the live comments. If you guys have any questions or maybe you want to know my take on something, feel free to leave it in the comments for sure. We are 40 minutes into this 3-hour podcast, and I'll probably do this in 2 parts. So I'll probably do one part right now and probably another part tomorrow. So if you do want to stay tuned in for tomorrow and watch the rest of the podcast with me, feel free to go ahead and do this. But this is 24 Controversial Truths About Success and Failure with Chris Williamson and Alex Hormozi. Just came out today, so if you're watching this with me, this probably is your first time watching this, hopefully.
.com/modern wisdom, a modern wisdom, a checkout. If you want revenge for the bad things that have happened in your life, start with the version of you that hasn't lived up to your potential.
Fantastic.
So I think a lot of us have the battle of the other self that we're the lesser version of ourself that we're trying to kill every single day. And so a lot of times we have this desire to point the blame finger externally, but wherever you point the finger of blame, power follows. And so whoever I blame for the life I have is the person who I give all the power over my existence, over my circumstances. And so it hurts, but if you turn the finger inwards and you start saying, I don't like my life. The person that I need to punish or get back at is the real person who got me here, which is me. And so you may be right that other people did certain things or you got dealt a bad hand. It also doesn't matter because the only thing that you can control is obviously the actions that you take. And the only person who's in control of that is you. And so the revenge porn is thinking about what the version of you who got you here did, and then acting in the exact opposite of that as many times as you possibly can. And the pain that you feel by rejecting the thing that you used to do that got you into this bad circumstance, that's the real revenge.
It's kind of like the stoic fork, the dichotomy of control, but it's just taking all of that and just lumping it all on you. Yeah, it's I mean, this is kind of the pushback against victimhood culture, that externalizing the locus of control, it is the fault of the politics or the economy, or it's the state of the dollar, or it's the patriarchy, or it's whatever. He goes, hey, look, you will get 100x, 1000x your returns, placing your efforts to try and change those things on you as opposed to on the world. Like I think basically the best way to move through the world is to see your entire surroundings as immutable. and you as mutable. You're the only mutable thing in the entire world. You're the only thing that can change. Everybody else, people, opinions, places, economy, politicians, policies, all of that, none of that's going to change. You can change. That's it. And then maybe some of the other stuff does, and that would be great.
That is actually a fantastic frame that I think a lot of people should live their life through. You cannot control anything besides yourself. So act and take your life as if you have the full responsibility for your life, because you have the full responsibility for your life, and you need the full accountability for anything and everything that goes your way or doesn't go your way. You need full accountability within all those things. And like Alex Hormozi was mentioning, he mentioned how if you decide to point the finger of responsibility at something else that is outside of yourself, you're giving it all the power. And that is exactly how you should frame your mind and frame your decisions and frame your what is responsible for whatever the situation, or whatever the whatever the situation is, essentially. So if you're going to point the finger of blame on something, it should always be yourself. It should always come back down to yourself, and you should take that full responsibility, because why would you give the power out to anyone else besides you? You're the only one that can change within this world, so you might as well act as if you're the one that is responsible for change within your own personal world. The outside circumstances are going to be what they are. You cannot control them. You cannot influence them. All you can do is accept them, and accept the simple fact that you are the only one that can change. And if you're acting the ways in which you know you need to act, that means you're going to be able to change and adapt each and every way that's going to make your life better. If you have any other beliefs outside of that, that is when you run into a lot more problems. And that's when you start blaming shit that isn't exactly what's truly deep down at fault.
It's a really interesting concept. So, do we accept the world and change ourselves, or do we change the world and accept ourselves? And so it's a really interesting dichotomy when you ask the question, because both of those sound right. You're like, I should accept myself and change the world. But on the other hand, you're like, wait, no, I should accept the world and change myself.
Yeah.
And so, because they're both pithy.
Yeah.
Pithy
aphorism porn.
Right. And so I think all of it comes down to, when you change yourself, you will change the world, because you'll change how you see it.
I think as well, when it comes to accepting yourself, do you want to accept you? Do you want to accept a version of you that you shouldn't accept? One that you're not proud of, one that doesn't live up to their word, one whose thoughts, actions, and intentions aren't aligned fully. You go, well, I mean, I can, but I don't particularly feel good about that. That feels like the higher version of me, the potential version of me that I want to live up to is, I'm sort of derogating them, that this isn't really the tribute to them that it should be. And yeah, that's why the self-acceptance movement, that's why people feel icky about it. People feel icky about the self-acceptance movement, because they know that people are accepting a version of themselves which is falling short from what it could be.
I would say that they're not accepting themselves in saying that they accept themselves. So if I say, is there a version of yourself that's better than you are right now? And most people hopefully would say yes. It's like, great, accept that person. And I think that, to me, when we talk about the authenticity, accepting yourself is accepting the ideal that we can live up to. And that is what we accept, not the shitty version of that we are today. And I think that marries both sides of the argument.
That is a great point, right? The only person that you should be accepting of is the best version of you that exists out there. And you should not accept anything less, because if you're accepting anything less, then you're settling for less than what could have been. And obviously, you know, the more progress you make, the more potential you have, to an extent, of course. But at the same time, you should not have this idea of just being fully content, unless you're doing and being all that you can, which most people probably would, if they were truly being honest with themselves. They're probably not, and that a lot of people are probably not even close to achieving or being what their potential is. So that being said, should you accept yourself, and should you be so quick to accept yourself just like everybody else? Probably not, because deep down inside, everybody knows. if they're close to their potential and if they're not, if they're living up to their potential or if they're not. And if they're not, just know that even if on the outside, if they're not making it seem like they have a lot of problems, or maybe they're putting on this happy front or facade, just know deep down inside, if they're not living up to their potential and they know it, they're dealing with the consequences of them not living up to their potential. That's just what it is. So accept yourself, but only accept your best self. Because if you're not accepting your best self, you're accepting a shittier version of yourself that no one else in your life truly deserves. That's what it is.
Jimmy Carr broke my brain with this one. Everyone is jealous of what you've got. No one is jealous of how you got it.
I love that quote.
My God. People see the trophies, but not the training ground.
Everybody wants the view, but no one wants the climb. I love it.
Yeah, it is that concept. I don't know if you guys ever heard of this before. It's the public victories versus the private victories, right? Everybody wants a public victory, but no one really truly asks what it takes to have that public victory. And it is many, many, many private victories that no one sees. It's doing the hard work, making the sacrifices, taking on more responsibility, and going through the hardships that is required for that character development, right? But people want the flashy things within this life. I've always been way more interested on the character that was needed, or the level of character development that was needed in order to achieve that public victory. So yes, public victories versus private victories. How many private victories can you achieve to go ahead and get the public victories that you want? It is going to look like character development. That is the ultimate. That is the ultimate public and private victory, in my opinion.
But the people who win love the climb, and the real mountain has no peak. And so the view is always present the whole way up the climb.
Mm.
But it seems to me, to push back there, it seems to me like a lot of the time you're head down, the pleasure comes from the climb, not the view.
Sure.
For you. Again, maybe sort of non-typically constructed from a psychological perspective. So that was nice. That was diplomatic. So what would you say? And this is something that I think, you know, with these episodes that we do, I often want to try and get you to push a little bit more to adapt your ideas and your insights for people who maybe do have a little bit more of that emotionality that comes through, to try and sort of soften this up. Look, I understand that people need more degrees of freedom than me, typically. I understand that people probably can't get themselves to the level of work that I can. So do you ever sort of play with that idea of, okay, what does a little bit of view taking in look like whilst we're climbing?
I think a lot of the discontent comes from the judgment people have about what they should or should not do along the way. And so they take my description as prescription for what they should do. So I describe my life, and then people think I'm prescribing what they should do, and it couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to take a break at every 2 steps and take in the view, do it. I mean, in 4 generations, no one will remember your name. And so
see, that's
enjoy
what
the view if you feel like it.
That's how
I
it
just
gets you.
happen to enjoy how much I can see that I can do. That's what I enjoy, and I feel like I am most present when I work. And so I'm not going to go into work-life balance, whatever, because we already know where that conversation goes. But people have a harder time accepting that someone can just work all the time and truly love it. And I define that by there's nothing else I would rather do at any time. And so for me, I feel like I exercise absolute freedom in my life. And freedom is reinforcing for all species, dogs, cows, fish, humans. Freedom is one of the most positively reinforcing thing that people have, that everyone wants freedom.
Everybody wants to be able to say, "Fuck you."
Right. But once you say "fuck you," you have to do something, because you can't just stand there and saying "fuck you" over and over again for hours for the rest of your life. You start to do something, and that thing that you choose to do after you say "fuck you" is what you want to do.
That's an interesting point. So there are certain things that you have to do to get to the point where you don't have to do things you don't want to do. And then when you're liberated, there is a whole new challenge now because it's a completely blank map where you have to actually define that. That's one of the things, you know, about working for yourself. There's a lot of derogation about 9-to-5s and university education and kind of the typical track and stuff. Like, bro, you should be very cautious about criticizing people that have more normal salaried 9-to-5 jobs, because I look at most of my friends and they can't not take their work home with them. So for certain psychological makeups, who's more free? The person that actually gets to shut their work laptop at 5 p.m. In France, they've got this new policy now where you can't email staff after, I think it's maybe 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. at night in certain businesses to try and sort of enforce this work-life balance and stuff like that. So for certain people, you're shaking your head. What's your problem?
I mean, my first thought was, well, France just took its irrelevant economy and just made it less relevant. And secondarily, the person who made that rule is somebody who fundamentally doesn't understand human behavior. So if they were to pass that rule for me, then what they did is they actually made my life worse.
This was the thing when Elon took over Twitter. So it's one of my favorite stories over the last couple of years. Elon buys Twitter. Elon finds out that 80% of the staff base just drink smoothies and go on hot girl walks all day. And he fires them.
Yeah.
And says, this team, it was him and a bunch of Asian dudes, selfie. And he says, this is the team that's going to run Twitter now. And he puts, I think, a job posting out, maybe on Twitter. And he says, I want people who want to work harder than they ever have on the most difficult problems in the world and blah, 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 blah. And he got tons of shit for it. And they said, this is a regressive policy for industry. This is taking people back to sending kids up the chimneys and so on and so forth. And it's just a complete failure of theory of mind that there are people out there for whom that is the job advert. I want to work harder than I ever have on the most difficult problems in the world at an intensity that would kill most people, because that's where I derive pleasure and satisfaction from. That's the best situation that I could hope for. And trying to take your model of, well, yeah, but what about my maternity leave? And yeah, but what about, jeans Fridays? And yeah, but what about, hot girl walks? All of that.
You just mentioned that shit.
Those are things that people don't want. Adding those in gets in the way of the thing that they do want.
Just thinking. He's thinking.
I think a lot of the confusion around the people who are wanting to work harder than they are, or don't like that I work hard or that you work hard, think that they take this statement as a judgment or a criticism on how they live their life. And it's because on the other side of that free line, you're like, okay, I'm now free. I have a blank slate. If I do something or you do something that they deem painful for them now, or something that they don't enjoy, they then say, you are suffering and that is bad. And both of those things I reject wholeheartedly. First, you don't know that I'm suffering because you have no idea what's going on inside of me. And also, what does your judgment mean at all to me?
There's a Tim Cook internal memo that he sent. There's a saying that if you do what you love, you will never work a day in your life. At Apple, I learned that is a total crock. You will work harder than you ever thought possible, but the tools will feel light in your hands.
That's good right there. That's good.
Chef's kiss. Yeah. Chef's kiss, Tim Cook.
I feel like you crushed that one.
Fucking crushed it.
I have a friend who worked for a very high-level recruitment company, C-suite execs for the biggest companies on the planet. I don't know whether it was some internal intranet thing or whether they actually saw these people or they maybe pool candidates with other companies, but he was able to see the breakdown interviews with some of the best CEOs in the world. So he was able to see the summary of Tim Cook and Susanna Wojcicki, the lady, and apparently the first line. So these guys are seeing everybody, right, the best on the planet, right? And I was like, okay, so just explain to me the interpretation difference between the guys that are already AAA and then Tim Cook. And he said the first line of Tim Cook's summary just said, rock star. That was the first thing. All it said was rock star. And he realized that in a pool of the best executives on the planet, people like Tim and people like Susanna still are heads and shoulders above the rest. I just thought that was so cool to like see these people in their nascent stage before they've got the thing that they're going to really magnify.
They had all the attributes. They didn't have the proof yet.
Yeah, they didn't have the playground. They didn't have the petri dish to be able to show just how much they could multiply it.
Yeah. Which I think about that a lot when it comes to kind of like potential energy versus reality for people on their way up. And so there's this huge time delay between when we start behaving in a way that a winner behaves and when we start winning. And the problem is that the bigger the mountain you're trying to climb, the bigger the W you're trying to get, typically the more delayed it is
Longer
between
the lag.
Yeah, between when you start behaving like a winner and when you start being a winner. And most people don't get the fast enough feedback loop to know that they're on the right path when they are taking these first steps in the right direction, because they have this really big goal, but they forget that with that really big goal comes the even longer delay that it takes to get there, while still continuing to act with no feedback from society.
No positive reinforcement, no
whatsoever.
Nothing.
And I think that's like, if I actually had to put a real, like what has worked so well for me and why the input over the output focus has been so powerful, is that I can extend the time horizon basically indefinitely, because the goal is me and then the external goals occur.
You don't need the positive reinforcement. I mean, everybody's seen it.
No, I need the positive reinforcement, but the positive reinforcement is coming from me.
Internally.
I'm just being like, just because I think it's important.
The positive external reinforcement that most people are looking for.
Right. But if you are the goal, then the actions you take every day are reinforcing who you believe yourself to be. That's where the confidence comes from.
As long as they're directionally correct.
And if you just want to be satisfied, then just work your ass off.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's seen one of those exponential graphs. And one of my good friends, George, bought me, Ad Professor.
He's great.
He's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
I found, I'll tell you once, fucking, he won't let me say it. But he's just got the most insane client, like one of the coolest companies on the planet. He bought me for a gift last year. It's the 1 million subscriber announcement post that I did. It's the first ever test footage episode I did in 2017. And in the middle is the play graph that goes between the two. And you look, and it is up until a year, at the time, up until like a year before, it's flat. There's nothing. There was days, I remember looking back, there was days when we were doing this show in March, April, and May of 2018 where we did 0 plays. We'd already launched. I was releasing an episode a week, and there was days where we did no plays. And I released an episode and we did no plays. I went back through and looked. I don't think I even told you this. I messaged every single one of the 1,000 contacts in my phone that I'd accumulated from Nightlife promo on WhatsApp saying, "Hi, I've just launched a podcast. Would you mind subscribing to me?" 1,000 different people bunched into 50-person broadcast lists, because that was the maximum broadcast list you used to be able to do. And I was the most ground floor, door-to-door sales to try and accumulate an audience. And it just keeps happening. There's no, presuming that you keep on going exponentially, it makes every previous version paltry. And yeah, being able to continue doing something without seeing the results of your work is one of the best competitive advantages, because everybody else is feeling the same discomfort that you are. Everybody else is going, I don't know if this is going to work, and this is hard, and why is no one telling me that I'm doing a good job, and fuck, another day with no plays, that's stupid. And then you end up looking at the top 100 podcasts in the world, I think account for 80% of the global plays. 100 shows out of about 4 million account for 80% of the plays, which means there's what, 399,900 and fucking, that has got the entire rest of it. That's 20% for those. That's it.
At the end of the day, here's the message that I really pull from that. Having my own podcast and things like that is don't quit. Why why would you even conceptualize quitting? If you're going to start something, if you're building something, if you're passionate about it, why quit? That is the determination and that is the focus. That is the mindset that you should have. The difference between the difference between the people that you look up to and you, or the people that you don't look up to, is simply their ability to just not quit, to stay persistent, to stay consistent. And I know you've heard people talk about this type of stuff all the time, maybe. But yes, it is just as simple as don't quit. Just don't quit. People have a hard time of not seeing results as quickly as they would like. And of course, I'm a person that I would say that does a lot, and I haven't seen as many results as um, a lot of people would be satisfied with. So that is something that I do understand thoroughly when I'm making these videos and making these podcasts. Is 99% of people would have already quit. They haven't seen the result of their hard work, so they would just quit. But then you're just like everybody else who quits. It's the difference between those people and the people that you want to be like is simply their ability to say, I'm not gonna quit. I don't even want to quit. I don't even conceptualize the reality that can be if I did quit. So if you're trying to pursue something right now, if you're building a personal brand, if you're doing something, just don't quit. See where it can take you, but just don't quit.
The leading indicator of a successful person is the ability to act without anything happening. And when you continue down that path, it happens slower than you expect and then faster than you can imagine. And I think that's the part that everyone misses, is they expect the faster than they can imagine, and they imagine really big. And so then their expectations are really big, really fast, but they take the intensity and they don't apply it to a timeline that's appropriate.
In other news this episode.
This is facts. This is facts. It might take longer. It might take longer to get to where you're trying to go. But if you don't quit, then you'll eventually get there. The reason why most people don't get there is simply because they quit. So don't quit. Why quit? Why be a quitter? Why hide the reputation? Why do that to yourself? Why miss out on what could have been? Just don't quit. That's all I have to say, man. It's that simple, but yet there's still people who quit. I don't understand. That's not in my DNA, bro.
nt.com/modern wisdom. This is from Mark Manson. Why I hate being around negative people. Being an asshole is a weak person's idea of strength. Complaining is their connection. Never let yourself be held back by other people's fears. People criticize what they were afraid to do themselves because bold action reminds them of their own inaction. If you're afraid to be criticized, why do you care about the opinions of those who are too timid to do it themselves?
Facts.
If you are the criticizer, does tearing down someone who has the courage you lack make you better?
Wow.
People criticize because it helps them justify the risks they chose not to take,
Damn.
in the hopes that it'll dissuade you from doing it, so that you can be in the exact same position as
Oh,
them,
I'm
which
sorry,
then
man. I gotta go
justifies
back.
that they,
Jesus Christ.
in the hopes that it'll dissuade you from doing it, so that you can be in the exact same position as them, which then justifies that they made the right call.
This happened when I stopped drinking. It was now going low and no on alcohol is kind of in vogue and super duper common. But as a club promoter in 2015, 2016, that was pretty rare. And I think a lot of the pushback that I got from the people around me, some of the people around me, was your behavior is throwing my behavior into sharp contrast. And, this is the lonely chapter, right? This is why the movement away from your existing friend group. This is Neo, you've already been down that road. You know where it leads. You know you don't want to go there. It's all of those things. But because, at least for me, I always have such inherent uncertainty of my own opinions and such a sense that everybody else is balanced and actually knows what they're doing, that I give undue weight to the criticisms of others. Oh, maybe they are right. Maybe it is stupid for me to stop drinking. Maybe this does make me boring. maybe it is pointless for me to do. Like, who even knows if meditation works? Fuck Sam Harris, right? Like, you know, all of these doubts that start to creep in, and that, like we were saying before, this is the discomfort that everybody feels, whether you're launching a business or doing personal development or doing all the rest of it. And as opposed to thinking about it as a bug, think about it as a feature. And as opposed to thinking about it as
You got it?
something
You got it?
that's a personal curse that's difficult, think about it as the selection criteria that everybody has to get over. That's the reason why so few people are equanimous and actually have peace in their mind, because meditation is hard and everyone thinks, am I doing it right? This kind of sucks and I'm twitchy and I'm tired today. Why are so few people in shape? Because going to the gym and sticking to the gym is difficult. Maybe it's a tiny bit easier for some people that like it than others, but for most people, most of the time, it's really, really hard. Thinking about the challenges that you need to face is just a selection criteria. The cost of doing business, right? This is just the cost of doing business, and I need to pay it.
Pay up, man.
It's rarely the information or the intensity that makes things hard. It's the sticking with it that makes it hard. And so the desire that we have to quit is simply breaking the consistency.
Which is why you must eliminate quit from your vocabulary. You must eliminate quit from your identity. You must eliminate this. It's not an option. There is no way out. This is the only way. There's no quitting. The people who even begin to conceptualize quitting, you've already failed. You already have a flawed mindset. You have already have the incorrect mental mind frame that would allow you for your downfall anyways. I don't conceptualize failure. If I pursue something, and it's something that I wanted to go ahead and do, and it's something that I convinced myself of doing, why would quit even be in the stratosphere? You see what I'm saying? It just doesn't make any sense. So when I say don't quit, if you've chosen to do something, stick with your decision and don't even conceptualize quitting. Because if you did, I'm not gonna say you probably shouldn't be doing it, but you're flawed. You're really, really flawed in the decision that you had previously made. And if you had previously thought it was the right decision, stick with it. Get rid of this inclination that you have to even want to quit. It's a flawed personal characteristic. That's all I'd say.
That's why consistency has always been the hardest thing for most people to achieve. But the intensity of what you have to do to be successful is much lower than most people expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes they suffer significantly more in a short period of time than is required to be successful over a much longer period of time with a much lower intensity. And so it's just like if you walk for 5 minutes a day, you're going to get, 50% of the health benefits, probably more than that, I'm sure, of just even exercising. You add 10 years to your life if you walked 5 or 10 minutes a day. And the path of personal development is befriending uncertainty. And so I obviously sit from the entrepreneurial perspective, but almost all decisions that you make in the beginning, you have incomplete data and you have to make decisions anyways. And so it's growing comfortable with taking your best bad guess and being directionally correct rather than searching for a perfect answer, because a perfect answer assumes perfect information, which you can only have after you begin. And so in some ways, making a decision is the perfect answer so that you can get the information
Feedback
to then improve the quality of the decision later. And I think that one loop is what a lot of people miss out on, is they obsess for years sometimes on the perfect pick, the perfect business, the perfect job, the perfect mate, when most of the times beginning each step eliminates the next step, which means the information, the feedback that you get from walking gives you more about where to walk than trying to sit at the beginning in the darkness and pick a direction.
Well, it's the difference as well, I think, between people who are super advanced, super developed, super far down the line and people who are beginning. It's like, dude, what are you risking by trying to do this thing? For you, it's fine for you to spend 18 months negotiating with Sam on the
Yeah.
school deal.
Yeah.
But if you are yet to do any business, that's probably not necessarily the right way to go about things. Tim Ferriss says, in the short term, your success depends on your intensity. In the long term, your success depends on your consistency. Do not sacrifice the latter for the former.
What's wild about the fear that people have when they're starting out is that they say things like, I have nothing going for me. I have no advantages. I have nothing to my name. I have no money. I have no network. I have no resources. But using Rory Sutherland's reframing, it also means that you have nothing to lose, which makes you incredibly dangerous. And I think people wildly underestimate how many shots on goal you can take when you have nothing to lose. Whereas when someone has something to lose, they have to be more and more selective about the shots they take. And so you have the perfect conditions for taking risk, because the worst case scenario is baseline, is where you're currently at.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that
your
means,
downside is this.
which means that it's like going to the casino and playing craps, but they say that you can just keep playing until you win. But people are afraid to roll.
Reminder for anyone internally debating weekend plans. If you don't want to go, don't go. If they care whether you go or not, they don't care about you. And if they care about you, they don't care if you go or not. Just because you have free time doesn't mean anyone who asks for it is entitled to it.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end off for today. Appreciate everyone for stopping by. I'm ending it off. There's still about 2 hours left of this podcast. If you want to go ahead and watch the part 2 that I'll be doing tomorrow, tap in with that for sure. I'll be going live probably a little bit earlier than I did today, so tap in with that if you want to see part 2. Hopefully only part 2 of this. I might have to do a part 3. A few things I want to say before I go ahead and end it off. Thank you for everyone for watching. If there is something that you've enjoyed, then please leave it in the comments for sure. These are definitely two guys that I do enjoy watching, especially them together. Chris Williamson, fantastic, one of my favorite podcasters. Alex Hormozi, very, very good. He's definitely very, very different when it comes to his approach and his views on success in a lot of different aspects. So, yeah, they're definitely good guys. Tap in with the next live stream that I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Like I said, it'll be a little bit earlier, so tap in with that for sure. Next podcast is going to be on Thursday. Also, I'll be doing a music live stream on Thursday as well. Tap in with that for sure as well. Leave a like on my YouTube shorts. Tap in with me on Spotify at Life of a Champ Podcast. You already know the deal. Leave you guys off with the motto of the channel, man. Fellas out here, man, we don't just work around here, man. We outwork. So make sure y'all work with these motherfuckers, because you know that I am. And you know the people that are around me, you know they are as well. Y'all have a good night, and